Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, gender inequality. The pandemic has had a regressive effect, especially on women in employment. More of them work on the front lines, more are likely to lose their jobs, and more have given up their jobs to care for others. What governments need to do to keep women in work or lose trillions in lost output. Also this week, China invests billions in Iraq. But is the cash-strapped country ready to turn away investments? We will hear from Iraq's oil minister. And with millions pushed into poverty before the devastating second wave, just how will India's economy fare as it eases its lockdowns, state by state? Well, if you've kept your job during this pandemic, and we're talking 15 months of disruption here, then let's face it, you've done pretty well. The pandemic has not been kind, especially to low-income workers in the industrialised or developing world, and the recovery has not been inclusive. So this week we are focusing on the extraordinary and disproportionate effect on women, and at all income levels. Career and childcare, work and family life, it's fair to say women take on a greater share of the burden. Now, we've got a lot of numbers for you here, but they tell the story starkly and effectively. According to the management consulting firm McKinsey, women's jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable to this crisis than those of men. Women actually make up 39% of global employment, but account for 54% of overall job losses. And if nothing's done about this, the prediction is that global economic growth could be $1 trillion lower by 2030 than it would be if male and female unemployment were even. Conversely, taking action now to advance gender equality could add $13 trillion to global GDP by 2030. So the choice really seems pretty obvious. Now, that is all overall numbers, but just think for a moment about the healthcare sector alone, because it has been the heart of this crisis. And what you may not have known, but also may have suspected, is that women actually make up 70% of all healthcare workers. The Lancet Journal estimates female contributions to healthcare are equivalent to nearly 5% of global GDP, or $3 trillion alone to global health, but nearly half is unpaid and unrecognised. Or it's just unfair. You know, it needed a European court ruling, this was in the case of the British supermarket chain Tesco, for female shop staff to be able to compare their roles with male colleagues at the distribution centres. Now, that's all great for women in the first world who have access to legal representation, but migrant domestic workers, who number 11.5 million and are mostly women, have been left unpaid and stranded from the Middle East to Asia. So the picture can be pretty grim, and sadly, the choices are too. You know, around 2 million Kenyans have lost their jobs since the beginning of the pandemic, and many have been forced to make some difficult decisions to survive. In Nairobi, Malcolm Webb spoke to women who've had to turn to sex work just to put food on the table.
Sarah and Mary, not their real names, are among around 2 million Kenyans who've lost their jobs since the COVID pandemic began. Sarah worked in an electronics shop here in the capital, Nairobi. It went bust during the first lockdown. She said she's had to do sex work ever since to be able to feed her 2 children.
My life has turned into something that I never thought I would be in my life. Because if I look at my children in my house, they'll go hungry. So this is what I was left with. You don't have a choice, but it's something that makes you feel, as a woman, it makes you feel unworthy.
She says men paid about $10 for sex at first. That's now dropped to about $2 as the economy's contracted over the last year. The markets are much quieter than they were before the pandemic. A lot of people who lost their jobs here in the city have moved back to the countryside. The people selling food here say demand is really down, and they say that means more wastage of perishables like these bananas. Economists say that the government's taxing people more to try and cover the costs of repaying its large and growing debts, plus a spike in fuel prices has pushed up the price of food and other commodities. The cost of living's going up, making life for most people even harder. A few people have made a lot of money from supplying COVID tests, masks and medical equipment. Some made even more money by being paid to supply them to the government and not delivering anything at all. the latest in decades of corruption scandals. Kenyans are tired of it. So when the International Monetary Fund agreed to lend the government $2.3 billion to help through the crisis, thousands of Kenyans took to social media to object to the borrowing of yet more money that they believe will be stolen. But experts say more public spending is still the only way to help people.
The gap between the have-nots and the haves and the have-nots is widening up. The rate at which poverty levels are going to increase. We are going to have so many youths in this country who are going to be engaged in crime as a result of lack of the government measures to be put in place to ensure that the youths can have something to do.
Tourism is one of the country's largest earners of foreign currency. The sector employed about 2 million people. Many of them have been laid off as hotels and lodges now lie empty. Here, women wait by the roadside, waiting and hoping for domestic work, which they say has also dried up as wealthy employers fear getting COVID. People are running out of options, as did Sarah and Mary. They both say the economic impact of the pandemic has been far more damaging than the virus itself, and they say they want it to be over so they can get hired again and stop having sex for money.
All right, let's get some analysis on this now with Neelanjana Mukhia, who's the head of global engagement from ActionAid. Great to have you with us from New Delhi today. We're going to focus really, I think, on the developing world more than anything else here. But just a first sort of broad thought. Do you think that corporations and indeed governments are finally waking up to the fact that women aren't treated the same, that the inequality is there, and that it's not just anecdotal anymore? I mean, the evidence, the numbers are there for everyone to see.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I think that there is a lot of momentum. There is evidence that has, that's clear, especially under COVID. We all knew that women are, treated differently and face a lot of barriers. But now we have evidence to back up our claims, and governments are indeed and should indeed listen to that evidence.
Let's split it a little bit into governments and companies. How much burden should go on the governments and the state in the ideas of, childcare, actually recognising that women do a different job and are split between home and work more? How much of that burden should go onto the state?
Well, the burden has to go onto the state, because if we look at the unpaid care work that women do, if you just look at the figures, it's 16.4 billion hours per day that are spent on unpaid care work, and 2/3 of this work is done by women. And this amounts to 2 billion people working over 8 hours per day with no remuneration. If we were to value these services that women are delivering, then that would, just on the basis of a minimum wage, that would amount to about 9% of the global GDP, or $11 trillion US dollars. And so this is, and this was before the pandemic, and UN Women's report shows that the unpaid care and domestic work that women are doing has increased massively during the pandemic because of school closures, because of services not being delivered. And this disproportionate burden of care that women are carrying is not only unjust, it's unsustainable.
I hate to be capitalist about this, but how do we pay for all of this? Where does the money come from? Is it, is it taxation? Is it austerity? How does it work?
Well, what we have done in ActionAid is our research. We have asked for action on 3 things. So one is debt, the second is austerity, and the third is tax. So on debt, we found that just this, again, this is pre-COVID, in 2019, Kenya, Ghana, and Gambia were spending more than 3 times as much on external debt prepayments as on health. And in Congo, Brazzaville, it's up to 5 times as much. Ghana has one of the highest debt servicing costs in the country, in the world, at about 59% of its GDP. So it spends about 4.1 billion on US dollars on foreign debt payments and just about 1.3 on health. So debt suspension would enable Ghana, for instance, to double its workforce, public health workforce, and still have $1 billion left over in their budgets. So the moment, debt servicing means lower public spending. Lower public spending means broken public services, which means women have to carry that. Women have to carry that burden.
Can I ask you? Sorry, I'll just interrupt you there. I want to ask you a couple of other questions and a couple of other areas. One, I just want to focus in on the healthcare sector, which you've mentioned. For one reason is that a lot more women work in the healthcare sector. They've been exposed to the virus, to conditions, poor conditions for a long time. I mean, India is a perfect example of going through the second wave that it has been. But also the fact of, access to healthcare, people not having enough access to it. It's been privatized a lot in a place like India, and people, are fundamental that they don't have access to.
In terms of India itself, it's the government spending on public health is incredibly low. It's one of the lowest in the world. So we are looking at under 2% of the GDP that goes to public health spending, which means that there are about 0.6% of beds available for 1,000 people. And we also have one of the highest out-of-pocket expenditures on health, which means that people are driven into poverty because of their they're paying. There's no public support. There's no support from the state, and there's no insurance. And that kind of privatization has loomed in India, as you've rightly sort of mentioned. We are looking at now in India about 70% of health provision in India is through the private sector, which means access questions, which means, especially for women, but also for poor people in rural areas, there's a massive, crisis of the public health infrastructure. Yeah. We don't have enough primary and community health services in the rural areas. This is also, one is privatization, but the second is also loan conditionalities that developing countries have to implement. And these are IMF loan conditionalities. And in our report, we found that the IMF loan conditionalities require governments to freeze their wage bills, the public sector wage bills. And they've asked, what we found in our report is that they've asked about 80% of low-income countries to plan for zero increase in their public sector wage bills. And that just means that, when countries are told to contain their wage bills, it means fewer doctors, fewer nurses, frontline healthcare workers, etc.
It's just about getting the basics right, isn't it? Everything you've said today, such fundamental, simple sort of stuff, and it's what needs to be improved on, doesn't it? Neelanjana Mukhia, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We're going to stay in India now, which, as we well know, has been battling its second devastating wave of coronavirus. The response was for most of India's industrialised states to implement localised lockdowns, which makes sense, of course. But the thing is, even before that, the crisis had pushed millions of people into poverty. Elizabeth Paranam reports now from New Delhi.
For the past month, Shiv Pillai and his wife Vitu have been selling coconut water to earn a living. It is a new endeavour for the couple, who are expecting their first child in September. Shiv had been working in the car showroom nearby when Delhi's regional government imposed a lockdown which forced all shops selling non-essential items to close.
It doesn't compare to what I earned earlier, but the company won't give the salary and we have to run our house, pay our rent and take care of our daily expenses. You can imagine how cash-strapped we are that my wife comes here to help me in her condition.
Shiv used to earn $275 a month. Now his earnings depend on how many coconuts he sells. This is the Kisse Kahania NGO, which has been helping Shiv and Vitu with food rations and many others who've lost their jobs. Research by one of India's leading universities, Azim Premji, found that lockdowns in the past year have pushed more than 230 million Indians into poverty, which is defined as earning less than $5 a day. But this year's restrictions are unlike the nationwide lockdown last year, which saw a complete shutdown of all industries. Factories in many states have been allowed to remain open this year with limited staff. This clothing export business has been operating with 65% of its workforce.
We have the labor and they're secure that they have the job. Because of the partial lockdown, it has been really helpful that we are still maintaining everything. The orders we are executing, we are getting good orders.
Economists say India's government should focus on helping those who need it the most.
So the government has been doing a lot to help the business side. The first and the most important thing is to ensure that the people who are the most affected or the most badly affected need to be given a way out by delivering food or any help in kind, and also delivering some cash to them.
Shiv and Vitu hope Shiv will be rehired when the car shop reopens, but for now, they and millions of others like them are doing whatever they can to survive.
And finally to Iraq, OPEC's second largest oil producer, reliant on oil exports for nearly all its state revenue, and hit hard by the collapse in oil prices when the pandemic struck. Now, right now, OPEC is sticking rigidly to its plans to ease supply back into the market, which has helped oil prices rise to $72 a barrel for the first time since 2019. That is very much welcomed in cash-strapped Iraq, which had signed and then pulled out of a $2 billion oil deal with China. Baghdad had been under pressure to ditch the deal over concerns the country was simply awash with Chinese investments. Just in the last 12 months, China signed $40 billion worth of deals. Osama bin Javed sat down with Iraq's oil minister, Ihsan Abdul-Jabbar Ismail, and started by asking if the country was under pressure to cancel that Chinese contract.
No, there is no pressure, believe me. The idea that when we make this deal, this is the first time in SOMO to make this deal, when we designed this deal, it was some concern about shortage in cash for the January and February 2021. Alhamdulillah, we started this year with decreasing of oil price. So when we received the offer, we were something not under force of the shortage in cash. That is the main concern, that the shortage in cash, alhamdulillah, now is managed. So no need to hold part of Iraqi oil for another year. The other idea that this deal should be approved by the parliament in the national budget, So it was some challenge, this is internal challenge. So no need to bring cash, early cash. And there is some challenge about sending this to the parliament, needs some time. So it was better to freeze it for now.
Does it mean it's dead or it's frozen?
No, it is frozen. But if the Chinese contract saying we go or we terminate, we will go to terminate. If the Chinese stay with their position that they're waiting Iraq if they are go ahead or not, we will keep it as a freeze.
Let's talk about Iran. We've had allegations from Emirati companies about Iranian tankers using Iraqi oil. There's also been talk about the deals between Iraq importing Iranian gas and sort of international pressure about, and especially US sanctions. What is the situation that you find yourself in as the oil minister, and how are you going to deal with the Iranian question?
About exporting Iranian gas with the Iraqi certificate, it is not managed by Iraqi side, abadan. We have our obligation. We try to protect ourselves about that, and all our process is clean. If there is something from another area, we have no responsibility about that. We are clear and we are transparent with all international institute about that. We keep our production, we keep our document as clean as possible. That's one. And maybe there is other company try to deal like that, but it's not under umbrella of Iraqi side. For gas importing, you know that Iraq established more than 20 gigawatt of electricity of power generation, depending on gas, especially GE and Siemens. Iraq production now of gas is not more than 1.5 billion standard cubic foot. The need now is not less than 3.5 billion standard cubic foot. The more cheapest and easiest gas to export to Iraq is the Iranian gas. Now Iran under sanction, we respect that, we trust that. We try to do something, we try to find another solution for the gas. There is a challenge with the Iranian side about payment to them. We try to do something without any conflict with international entities in this situation, and we try to be committed to Iran about their revenue, because it is contractual issue, cannot say no. So we try to do something. In parallel, we try also to find another solution for that by acceleration the investment of gas and by going ahead with LNG important.
We are heading, like every year, towards the summer. It's going to be energy crisis like every year. It happens like clockwork. What is the oil ministry doing? Are you going to preempt the challenge? Is there anything that you are going to bring in which will try and mitigate the crisis that we see every year?
Wallahi, we try to provide all the network for providing two kinds of fuel for the energy sector. I mean the heavy fuel oil and the crude oil. And we support Ministry of Finance also by support them to provide some chemicals to keep the performance of their power generation as maximum as possible. On the other hand, we support all the gas industry in all the area. We have gas in North Gas Company and in Basra Gas Company, South Gas Company, to provide more and more gas during the summer. I think there is no crisis. The only crisis will happen if there is any cut from Iranian gas. This is our challenge in that. There is around 2 gigawatt adding to the production capacity. There is many network inside Iraq under construction, and some of them constructed. There is Salahuddin power generation, will be 600 megawatt will be available. There is around 400 megawatt from Zubair also, and there is 700 megawatt from North Rumail with investor. So there is around, as I told you, 2 gigawatt adding for the power generation. The only concern I have, if there is cut from Iranian gas, we try to keep a discussion with Iranian side about committed to their commitment to provide the gas during the summer for Iraqi power generation, and we are committed to pay to them when the sanctions dissolved, or if there is any way to do that.
Finally, you talked about a wide bouquet of international investment, all the way from Schlumberger to Honeywell and others. Talk to us about Chinese investment. Is the concern which has been raised by some people that more than 60% of the investment coming into Iraq is from China?
Yes.
And very quickly, Iraq is becoming a main Chinese market, yes, rather than its Western partners. So are those concerns true, and how is Iraq going to manage them?
We have till now BP in the biggest field, Rumaila, ExxonMobil in the second biggest field in West Gurna 1, Luke Oil in the third biggest field in West Gurna 2, ENI in Zubair and others, Gazprom, Luke Oil in the block Arido. So we have good staff and good IOCs from Western side. Chinese, yes, they are more flexible. They have, I can say more than 30% of the share market in EPC. They provide good value, good quality with good price. So in the competition, they are in competition with Western Union company, they are in competition with American company, but they win. So we cannot prevent them if they want EPC contractor. From investment side, they didn't take any investment opportunity since 5 years. The last opportunity they get in license round 4, it was before 5 years. So within these 5 years, there is no new investment for Chinese company. But there is EPC contractor, yes. It's true. There is a huge number of Turkish and Chinese company which take the share market in Iraq because they are risk holder. They are risk. They accept the risk in Iraq. They accept to work in multi-area with multi-difficulties. So this is the idea.
Iraq's oil minister there speaking to Osama bin Javed. Well, that is our show for this week, but I want to know what you think and what you want to see on the show. You can tweet or DM me at KamalAJE. On Twitter, do please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. If email is more your thing, no problem. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. And of course, more online at aljazeera.com/CTC, which takes you straight to our page with all our previous episodes there for you to catch up on. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.